You think modern kitchens have all the answers? Think again. Our Black grandparents mastered cooking techniques that required no electricity, no fancy gadgets, just skill, patience, and generational wisdom passed down through watching and doing. These methods created flavors no modern appliance can replicate. Here are 60 forgotten cooking techniques they used daily. Dried apple stack cake was a layered dessert with deep Appalachian and African American roots, made by rehydrating dried apples and spicing them into a thick filling. Thin layers of cake were stacked with the apple mixture spread between them, then left to sit so the flavors melded. It was a time-intensive dish that stretched precious fruit, making it last long past harvest. Families treasured it for holidays and gatherings, treating it as a centerpiece dessert. The dried apples, often gathered and preserved months earlier, carried the flavor of summer into the cold months. Children marveled at the tall, impressive cake, while adults admired the patience required to make it. Each slice told the story of careful preservation and thoughtful preparation. Today, stack cake is rarely seen outside of heritage cookbooks or festivals, its labor too demanding for modern kitchens. Yet it remains a delicious reminder of ingenuity and celebration born from scarcity. Forgotten now, it was once a sweet that held families and communities together around the table.
Seasoning food without measuring was criticized as imprecise cooking that could never produce consistent results, yet African American grandmothers created dishes so perfectly balanced that chefs could not replicate them. Scientists understand that experienced cooks develop sensory calibration, exceeding measuring cup accuracy, adjusting for variables recipes cannot account for. Research confirms that intuitive cooking engages multiple senses simultaneously, creating flavor decisions mechanical measurement misses. Grandmothers tasted as they cooked, adding pinches and dashes until their hands knew the dish was right. The practice developed over years of daily cooking, building expertise no cookbook could teach. What seemed like careless approximation was sophisticated skill responding to each unique batch of ingredients. Time dépense, reusing. The lid steam method finished thick pieces of fried meat by trapping heat to cook interiors without burning exteriors. African American cooks understood that large chicken pieces or thick pork chops needed more than surface frying to reach safe temperatures throughout. After achieving golden crusts on both sides, cooks would reduce heat and cover the skillet briefly, allowing trapped steam to penetrate inward. This technique required careful timing because too much steaming softened crispy coatings. Experienced cooks lifted lids periodically to release excess moisture while checking internal doneness. The method was especially valuable for bone-in pieces where meat near the bone cooked slowest. Mastering the lid steam technique meant serving fried foods that were perfectly crisp outside while thoroughly cooked within. Lard versus shortening debates divided Black kitchens throughout the 1950s South, with grandmothers defending their preferred frying fat fiercely. Lard rendered from hog fat delivered richer flavor and higher smoke points, creating crispier crusts with subtle pork undertones. Many families rendered their own during hog killing season, storing it in crocks for year-round use. Shortening like Crisco offered convenience without the work of rendering, plus it stayed solid without refrigeration. Some grandmothers mixed both, combining lard's flavor with shortening's stability. The choice depended on economics. Rural families with fresh pork favored lard, while urban cooks appreciated shortening's availability. Children grew up believing their grandmother's choice was the only correct one.
Molasses milk drink was the Depression-era version of an energy shake, created from little more than pantry staples. Warm milk was stirred with a spoonful of molasses, creating a sweet, dark tonic that provided energy and comfort. It had a strong, earthy sweetness that children often grew up with, and parents valued it as a way to stretch expensive ingredients. Molasses was rich in iron and minerals, making this drink more than just filling. It was also seen as a health booster. Families used it as a breakfast drink when eggs or meat were unavailable, or served it at bedtime as a soothing nightcap. Some even swore by it as a cure for weakness or fatigue. Its simplicity was part of its charm. 2 ingredients and a little heat transformed into something that felt indulgent. Today, molasses milk has been pushed aside by sodas, flavored syrups, and instant mixes. But in its time, it was both comfort and necessity. Molasses milk proved that even the leanest kitchens could serve up nourishment in a cup.
Eating organ meats regularly was dismissed as poverty food that sophisticated palates had outgrown, yet African American cooks served liver, gizzards, and kidneys that delivered nutrition no muscle meat could match. Scientists now recognize organ meats as nature's multivitamins, packed with B12, iron, and vitamin A that modern diets chronically lack. Research confirms that liver provides more concentrated nutrition per ounce than any other food. Grandmothers fried chicken livers until crispy, simmered gizzards until tender, and made dishes children grew up loving. The practice ensured families received essential nutrients when resources were limited. What food culture taught people to reject, nutrition science now urges them to reconsider. Those humble organs held the building blocks of health. Double-dipping batters created the thick, craggy crusts that made 1960s fried chicken legendary. The technique involved coating pieces, first in seasoned flour, then dipping into beaten eggs or buttermilk, and finally returning to flour for a second coating. This layered approach built crusts of remarkable thickness that stayed crispy long after cooking. Some cooks varied the second coating, using cornmeal or crushed crackers instead of repeating flour. The resting period between dips was equally important, as rushing resulted in batters that slid off during frying. Experienced cooks let each layer set briefly before proceeding, building foundations that adhered firmly to protein beneath. The double dipping method produced distinctive ridges that held seasoning and provided textural contrast in every bite. Flour dredging in paper bags was the mess-free technique Black grandmothers perfected for coating chicken, fish, and pork chops. Seasoned flour went into a large brown paper bag along with pieces of meat. The bag was folded closed, then shaken vigorously until every piece wore an even coat. Children often helped with the shaking, turning kitchen work into something playful. The paper absorbed excess moisture while distributing flour evenly without creating countertop disaster. When finished, the bag went straight into trash, leaving nothing to wash. The technique worked because confined space and agitation coated every surface. Some grandmothers added secret spice blends to the flour, creating proprietary mixtures that defined their signature fried foods. The paper bag method was practical genius that delivered perfectly coated results.
Ash cake. Cornbread was a survival trick passed down through generations, made when ovens or pans were not available, yet cornmeal was plentiful. Cooks mixed a simple batter of cornmeal, water, and salt, then wrapped it in cabbage or collard leaves to shield it from the dirt. The bundle was buried directly in hot ashes, where it slowly baked until firm and fragrant. When pulled from the fire and unwrapped, the bread carried a smoky flavor and a rustic crust unlike anything from a modern oven. Families prized this method because it cost nothing and could be done outdoors, whether on plantations, homesteads, or during long field days. For children, unwrapping the leaves felt like opening a hidden gift, revealing warm bread inside. Ash cakes filled bellies with little effort, connecting people directly to the earth and the fire that cooked it. Today, this trick is nearly forgotten, overshadowed by easy oven-baked cornbread. Yet it reminds us that ingenuity often comes from necessity, and a simple pile of ashes could produce a meal of strength and comfort.
Cooking with cast iron skillets was standard practice in African American kitchens long before scientists discovered the pans actually fortified food with dietary iron. Research confirms that acidic foods like tomatoes and greens cooked in cast iron absorb significant amounts of the mineral, helping prevent anemia in communities with limited access to red meat. Those heavy black pans passed down through generations were doing double duty as cookware and nutritional supplements. Grandmothers seasoned their skillets with lard, building layers of natural non-stick coating that modern chemists struggle to replicate safely. What seemed like stubborn attachment to old equipment was actually health intervention disguised as tradition. Scientists now recommend cast iron cooking for the same benefits Black cooks enjoyed for centuries. Cornmeal coating techniques brought distinctive Southern crunch to fried fish, okra, and countless other dishes. African American cooks understood that cornmeal required different handling than flour, demanding specific textures to achieve its signature crispy coating. The cornmeal was often stone ground locally, with coarser textures preferred for fish, while finer grinds worked better for vegetables. Seasoning was mixed directly into cornmeal, with some cooks adding small amounts of flour to improve adhesion, while others used pure cornmeal for maximum crunch. The coating process required pressing food firmly into the meal, ensuring complete coverage that formed an unbroken shell during frying. Temperature control was critical with cornmeal, as it browned faster than flour. These techniques defined Southern fried catfish. The draining station setup was practical engineering that Black grandmothers arranged before any frying began. Wire cooling racks set over sheet pans caught dripping grease, while allowing air to circulate beneath fried foods, keeping bottoms crispy. Some kitchens used brown paper bags layered with paper towels, the paper absorbing excess fat. The station sat close enough to transfer hot pieces quickly, but far enough from the stove to avoid splatter. Everything was arranged in sequence: raw food on one side, flour station in the middle, frying pan central, and draining area opposite. This assembly line organization prevented cross-contamination and kept workflow smooth. Children helped by replacing saturated papers and monitoring the growing pile of golden chicken. The setup showed how planning ahead made cooking easier.
Hog crackling gravy was a trick to bring bold flavor to otherwise plain meals of rice, potatoes, or cornbread. Cracklings, the crispy bits left from rendering pork fat, were stirred into pan drippings and flour to make a rich, textured gravy. The salty crunch of the cracklings turned a simple starch into something hearty and satisfying. Families loved it because it stretched scraps into abundance, proving that nothing from the hog was wasted. It was often poured over large bowls of rice, transforming the cheapest ingredient into a meal fit for a feast. Children scooped it eagerly, not realizing they were eating thrift disguised as indulgence. The gravy carried the smoky, savory essence of pork, a taste that defined many kitchens of the South. Today, hog crackling gravy is nearly forgotten, replaced by smoother gravies with no trace of grit. Yet in its time, it embodied the art of survival cooking, where resourcefulness brought joy to the table. Hog crackling gravy was poverty made flavorful.
Double frying for extra crispiness was considered wasteful by those who did not understand the science happening in that hot oil. African American cooks knew that frying chicken twice produced a crust that stayed crispy for hours, perfect for church picnics where food sat on tables through long afternoons. Scientists now confirm that the first fry cooks the interior and sets the coating, while the second fry at higher temperature creates a shatteringly crisp exterior with less oil absorption. The technique drives out moisture that would otherwise make coatings soggy. Grandmothers learned through trial what food engineers now study in laboratories. That extra step transformed ordinary fried chicken into legendary fried chicken. What seemed like unnecessary effort was precise technique that single frying simply cannot match. The resting period after coating was a crucial step that many modern cooks unknowingly skip. African American grandmothers understood that freshly coated pieces needed time before entering hot oil, allowing flour to hydrate slightly and form stronger bonds with the surface beneath. This resting period, typically 10 to 15 minutes, transformed loose, dusty coatings into firm shells that would not fall off during frying. Pieces that rested before frying emerged with intact crusts, while rushed batches left flour floating in the oil and bare spots on finished food. Some cooks placed coated pieces on wire racks during this waiting period, while others used wax paper-lined trays. The patience required contradicted the desire to eat quickly, but those who honored the resting period were rewarded with perfectly coated fried foods. The bread test for oil temperature was how Black grandmothers knew exactly when their grease was ready without any thermometer. A small cube of stale bread dropped into hot fat told the whole story. If it sank and sat motionless, the oil needed more time. If it browned too quickly, the heat was too high. But when that bread cube floated immediately, sizzled steadily, and turned golden in about 60 seconds, the grease was perfect for frying. This technique had been passed down through generations who never owned thermometers. Grandmothers could also read oil by watching its surface shimmer and ripple. Children learned to recognize that particular sizzle sound that meant perfect temperature. The bread test was simple, reliable, and cost nothing. Proof that good cooking came from observation rather than equipment.
Ground acorn flour. Bread was a survival food born from foraging, using acorns gathered in the fall to make flour. Families would crack the nuts, leach them in water to remove bitterness, then grind them into meal. Mixed with cornmeal or wheat flour, the acorn flour became hearty loaves of bread with a nutty flavor. Though labor-intensive, it provided sustenance when store-bought flour was too costly or scarce. Children often joined in shelling acorns, their hands stained from the tannins, while adults handled the soaking and grinding. The bread itself was dense and filling, a reminder that the forest could feed families if they had the patience to prepare it. For many, it was a food of hard times, eaten more out of necessity than delight. Today, it is almost forgotten, except among foragers or survivalists. Yet ground acorn flour bread reflects the ingenuity of past generations who made the land itself their pantry. It was resilience baked into every loaf, proof that nothing was overlooked.
Crackling cornbread brought crunch and richness to the table by folding crispy pork cracklings directly into the batter before baking. Grandmothers rendered fat back until golden and crisp, then chopped those cracklings into small pieces that studded the cornmeal mixture. The batter was poured into a smoking hot cast iron skillet greased with lard, creating that signature crispy bottom crust. Each bite delivered earthy cornmeal sweetness, interrupted by salty, crunchy pork that melted slightly from the oven's heat. This bread stretched precious meat scraps into something that made plain beans feel like a feast. Children fought over corner pieces where cracklings concentrated and edges turned extra crispy. The bread kept well for days, improving as pork fat continued seasoning the crumb. Oil straining and reuse stretched precious frying fat across multiple cooking sessions without sacrificing quality. African American families could not afford to discard oil after single uses, so they developed careful cleaning methods extending its life. After cooling, Used oil was poured through fine mesh strainers or cheesecloth to remove food particles that would burn during subsequent frying. Some cooks added potato slices to dirty oil and fried them briefly, believing potatoes absorbed all flavors and cleaned the fat. Strained oil was stored in covered containers away from light and heat until needed again. Families tracked how many times oil had been used, knowing it eventually degraded beyond usefulness. This stewardship represented economic necessity and the principle that wastefulness was unacceptable. Seasoning the flour right was where Black grandmothers distinguished their fried chicken from everyone else's. Plain flour produced bland coating, but properly seasoned flour created flavor in every bite. The base always included salt and black pepper, but from there, recipes diverged wildly. Some added paprika for color, others used cayenne for heat, garlic powder for depth, or onion powder for savory notes. A few grandmothers kept their blends secret, mixing spices when no one watched and storing pre-made batches in unmarked jars. The seasoning had to be generous enough to taste through the crust, but balanced enough that no single flavor dominated. Children often tried guessing ingredients, learning to identify spices by taste. These personal flour blends became family signatures.
Salt pork. Cornbread dressing was a flavorful side dish that brought richness to humble cornbread. Families crumbled leftover cornbread, moistened it with broth, and stirred in chopped salt pork for flavor. The fatty meat infused the dish with savory depth, transforming what could have been dry or bland. It was often served at Sunday dinners or holidays, making use of scraps while still feeling special. Children loved the crispy bits of pork hidden inside, while adults savored its hearty taste. The dish reflected the tradition of stretching ingredients to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Salt pork cornbread dressing was a blend of thrift and celebration, a way to elevate the everyday. Today, it has faded from memory, overshadowed by richer dressings and stuffing recipes. Yet it tells a story of kitchens that wasted nothing and always found ways to make meals meaningful. Salt pork cornbread dressing remains a forgotten comfort worth remembering.
Adding sugar to savory dishes was mocked as unsophisticated palate that could not appreciate real flavor. Yet, African American cooks knew a pinch of sweetness transformed their greens and tomato sauces into something extraordinary. Scientists now understand that sugar enhances perception of other flavors, reduces bitterness, and triggers pleasure centers that make food memorable. Research confirms that small amounts in savory dishes improve overall flavor balance without making food taste sweet. Grandmothers stirred a spoonful into collard greens, added it to cornbread batter, and balanced acidic tomato dishes with sweetness. The technique was subtle enough that guests never identified sugar as the secret ingredient. What seemed like strange kitchen habit was sophisticated flavor chemistry that top chefs now employ deliberately. Cracker crumb coatings offered an alternative to flour that produced distinctively crunchy textures on fried foods. African American cooks crushed saltine or butter crackers into fine crumbs, creating coating mixtures that fried into shatteringly crisp shells. The crackers were placed in cloth bags and rolled with bottles or crushed between wax paper sheets until uniformly fine. Seasoning was added to the crumbs, though crackers already contained salt that reduced additional needs. The coating process followed the same egg wash and dredge pattern used with flour, building layers that adhered firmly during frying. Cracker coatings worked especially well on pork chops and fish fillets, where buttery flavor complemented the proteins beneath. This technique transformed inexpensive crackers into gourmet quality coatings. The temperature recovery between batches was the discipline that separated skilled frying from amateur attempts in black kitchens. After removing finished pieces from the skillet, grandmothers waited for the oil to return to proper heat before adding the next batch. This recovery period took several minutes, but ensured consistent results across all servings. Rushing the next batch into oil that hadn't recovered meant the second round came out greasier and less crispy than the first. Experienced cooks used their bread test again between batches, confirming temperature before proceeding. The waiting time also allowed them to drain finished pieces and prepare the next round for dredging. Children learned that good frying required rhythm: cook, rest, recover, repeat. This methodical approach meant the last piece tasted as perfect as the first.
Cabbage core soup was a clever broth made from the tough centers of cabbage heads, parts most would discard. In times when waste was unthinkable, the cores were boiled slowly with pork fat, onions, or whatever scraps were available to coax out flavor. The result was a thin yet nourishing soup that could feed a family with little more than bones and water. It was seasoned simply, sometimes with only salt or pepper, yet it carried a surprising richness from the pork drippings. Children slurped it with cornbread, and adults appreciated that even what seemed inedible could still fill bowls. Cabbage core soup showed the power of stretching ingredients, turning waste into a centerpiece of survival cooking. In lean kitchens, nothing was ever thrown away, and this soup stood as proof of that ethic. Today, it has vanished from menus, remembered only in old family tales. Cabbage core soup was not glamorous, but it was comforting, a reminder that ingenuity could transform scraps into sustenance that warmed both body and spirit.
Cooking with smoked meat for seasoning was criticized as adding unnecessary fat to healthy vegetables, yet African American cooks understood something deeper about nutrition. Scientists now recognize that smoke contains compounds with antimicrobial properties while adding complex flavors impossible to replicate artificially. Research confirms that small amounts of smoked pork provide essential amino acids that transform plant-based meals into complete proteins. Ham hocks, bacon ends, and smoked turkey necks added collagen that promoted gut health. Grandmothers knew exactly how much meat was needed to season an entire pot of beans or greens, stretching precious protein while maximizing flavor. What dietitians once condemned, nutrition science, now acknowledges as intuitive understanding of how flavor and nutrition work together. Flour dredging methods in 1960s soul food kitchens went far beyond simple coating techniques. Cooks understood that the odd way flour adhered to meat determined the entire texture of the finished crust. The process began with patting proteins completely dry, as any moisture created steam pockets, preventing adhesion. Flour was seasoned heavily with salt, pepper, and paprika, then spread across shallow pans, allowing pieces to turn without crowding. The dredging motion was deliberate, pressing flour firmly into every crevice before shaking off excess with controlled wrist flicks. Many cooks double dredged, returning pieces to flour after brief rests to build thicker crusts. Some families kept dedicated dredging flour that accumulated seasoning over multiple uses. These methods produced crusts that shattered while clinging to moist meat beneath. Double frying for extra crispy results was a technique Black grandmothers used when nothing less than perfection would do. The first fry cooked food through at moderate temperature, sealing moisture and setting the crust. Then pieces rested on wire racks while oil heated higher. The second fry lasted only minutes, but transformed the exterior into something shatteringly crisp while the inside stayed tender. This method worked especially well for chicken and fish destined for Sunday dinner tables. The resting period allowed steam to escape, preventing sogginess that plagued single fry methods. Grandmothers timed both stages precisely, knowing seconds mattered. The extra effort showed in every bite, the crust crackling loudly between teeth. Children fought over the crispiest pieces, understanding this food represented extra love.
Parched corn snack was one of those clever foods that carried families through long days in the fields and nights by the fire. Dried corn kernels were roasted until they puffed and cracked, creating a crunchy and portable snack that could be carried in pockets. It was a favorite among children who loved the simple, salty crunch, and adults valued it because it stayed good for weeks without spoiling. Parched corn was not just a snack, but also a traveling food, eaten by workers, hunters, and anyone needing quick energy. Sometimes it was ground into meal and mixed with water, making it more versatile than it appeared. Sweet or savory versions could be made depending on what seasonings were available, but even plain, it was enough to stave off hunger. Today, you will rarely find parched corn except at heritage festivals or survivalist circles. It is a food born of simplicity, thrift, and foresight. Parched corn proved that sometimes the humblest grains could be transformed into lasting sustenance with nothing more than fire and patience.
Using bacon grease as cooking fat was condemned for decades as unhealthy habit that would clog arteries. Yet African American cooks never stopped saving every precious drop. Modern research reveals that rendered pork fat contains less saturated fat than butter and provides stable cooking temperatures that prevent harmful compounds created when vegetable oils break down. Scientists discovered that animal fats contain fat-soluble vitamins processed oils lack entirely. Grandmothers kept ceramic crocks by the stove, straining bacon, drippings for seasoning vegetables and frying eggs. What nutritionists once banned as dangerous, researchers now acknowledge as traditional wisdom that understood fat quality matters more than fat avoidance. That humble grease jar held more intelligence than years of misguided dietary advice. The smoke point test was a visual skill that separated novice cooks from masters of the fryer. Before kitchen thermometers became common, African American cooks learned to read oil temperatures through careful observation. They watched for the first wisps of smoke rising from the surface, knowing this indicated peak frying temperature. Too little heat meant soggy, grease-soaked food, while too much smoke meant burnt coatings and bitter flavors. Experienced cooks develop intuition for the exact shimmer and movement of properly heated oil, describing the moment when the surface seemed alive with tiny ripples. This knowledge passed through demonstration rather than written instruction, with mothers guiding daughters to recognize subtle visual cues. Mastering the smoke point test guaranteed perfectly golden fried foods every time. Skillet cornbread crust technique created that distinctive crispy bottom that made cast iron cornbread legendary in Black kitchens. The secret began with heating the empty skillet in a hot oven until it practically glowed, then adding generous bacon grease that immediately smoked. Batter went in next, hitting that screaming hot surface with a dramatic sizzle. Contact with intensely heated fat created an instant crust on the bottom while the top remained soft. As cornbread baked, that bottom crust turned deep golden brown, almost caramelized, with a crunch that shattered against teeth. The technique required confidence. Hesitation meant uneven crust or batter that stuck. Grandmothers moved quickly, having performed this ritual countless times. Children learned by watching, understanding the sizzle meant everything was working. Buttermilk soaking before frying was the tenderizing secret that made Black grandmothers' fried chicken legendary across the South.
Wild persimmon bread carried the sweetness of the land itself, made from fruit gathered by hand in the fall. Families waited until the persimmons were soft and ripe, their astringency gone, then mashed the pulp into batter with flour, eggs, and spices. The bread baked into loaves that were dense, fragrant, and naturally sweet. Foraging for persimmons was a seasonal ritual, with children climbing trees and filling baskets under the autumn sun. The fruit was free, abundant, and full of vitamins, making it a precious resource when money for sugar or store-bought sweets was scarce. Wild persimmon bread tasted like the season, a warm reminder that even hard times could offer comfort. It often appeared on holiday tables, stretching humble ingredients into a dish that felt special. Today, it is nearly forgotten, overshadowed by modern quick breads like banana bread. Yet the memory of wild persimmon bread connects us to resourcefulness, tradition, and the joy of turning foraged fruit into nourishment. Each slice told the story of making the most of what nature gave.
Using molasses instead of white sugar was considered old-fashioned and unsophisticated, a mark of poverty rather than deliberate choice. Scientists now recognize that blackstrap molasses contains significant iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium that refine white sugar strips away during processing. Research confirms that molasses provides antioxidants supporting bone health, blood sugar regulation, and cardiovascular function. African American cooks stirred it into coffee, drizzled it over biscuits, and baked it into gingerbread that satisfied sweet cravings while delivering actual nutrition. Grandmothers kept sticky jars in pantries, using molasses when money was tight, unknowingly choosing the healthier option. What was dismissed as poverty cooking turns out to be nutritional wisdom modern health advocates now recommend. Bacon grease preservation was a kitchen economy that transformed breakfast byproduct into frying gold. African American families never discarded rendered fat from morning bacon, instead straining it into dedicated containers kept beside the stove. This grease accumulated over weeks, developing complex flavors from countless breakfasts that no fresh fat could match. The preserved grease was used for frying everything from eggs to cornbread, adding smoky depth to every dish it touched. Families stored their grease in ceramic crocks, coffee cans, or glass jars, keeping it covered to prevent dust and off flavors. The oldest grease was used first while fresh additions settled at the bottom, creating a rotating system ensuring nothing spoiled. This practice represented the soul food philosophy that nothing edible should ever be wasted. Seasoning the skillet with bacon grease was ritual passed from mother to daughter in black kitchens throughout the 1950s South. After every use, grandmothers wiped their cast iron clean with a cloth, never soap, then rubbed warm bacon grease across the surface while the pan still held heat. This created a natural coating that deepened with every meal. The grease filled tiny pores in the iron, preventing rust and creating a glossy finish that announced years of careful tending. Children watched closely, understanding that a well-seasoned skillet was family treasure. Some pans had been seasoned for decades, their surfaces smoother than any modern coating. The grease added subtle depth to everything cooked afterward, meaning eggs carried traces of yesterday's breakfast. This technique transformed ordinary iron into heirloom vessels.
Slab bacon. Grease cookies were a sweet born out of thrift, when butter was scarce and nothing could be wasted. Families saved every drop of bacon grease in jars, using it not only for frying, but also for baking. When mixed into cookie dough with sugar, flour, and spices, the grease gave the cookies a unique smoky richness. They were soft, slightly salty, and filled with the taste of survival, proof that ingenuity could transform scraps into something special. Children often ate them warm from the oven, unaware they were built on frugality rather than luxury. These cookies carried the story of resilience, turning what others might discard into dessert. They were common in households where bacon was a rare indulgence, stretching its value far beyond breakfast. The smell of these cookies baking lingered in kitchens, a blend of sweet and savory unlike anything from store-bought treats. Today, they are nearly vanished, their memory tied to hard times. Slab bacon grease cookies show how even hardship can leave behind flavors worth remembering.
Using cornmeal in batters and breading was seen as cheap substitute for proper wheat flour by those unfamiliar with Southern cooking. African American cooks knew that cornmeal created textures wheat flour alone could never achieve. Scientists confirmed that cornmeal's coarser texture creates crispier coatings that stay crunchy longer, while its natural sugars promote better browning through caramelization. Research shows that corn's protein structure absorbs less oil than wheat-based batters, making fried foods lighter. Grandmothers dredged their catfish and okra in seasoned cornmeal, producing golden crusts that shattered satisfyingly. The technique was born from necessity, but perfected into preference. What seemed like making do with available ingredients was superior technique, delivering better results than expensive alternatives. Paper bag dredging was a clever method that simplified coating while minimizing mess in busy kitchens. African American cooks placed seasoned flour inside sturdy brown paper bags, added a few pieces of meat at a time, then shook vigorously until everything was evenly coated. The enclosed space created efficient tumbling that covered food more thoroughly than open pan methods. Children were often assigned shaking duties, turning a kitchen chore into playful participation that taught cooking fundamentals. The paper bags absorbed excess flour, leaving pieces with just the right amount of coating rather than heavy clumps. Some families reused bags across multiple meals, allowing them to develop concentrated seasoning that improved subsequent batches. This technique proved that brilliant cooking methods emerged from everyday problem solving. The chicken pieces went into bowls of tangy buttermilk for hours or overnight, the acid working slowly to break down tough fibers while adding subtle flavor. The buttermilk also helped flour coating adhere better, creating thicker crust that stayed put during frying. Some grandmothers added hot sauce or garlic to their buttermilk baths. Children would peer into refrigerators at bowls of soaking chicken, anticipating the meal to come. When soaked pieces met seasoned flour, the wet surface grabbed coating eagerly. The science was simple. Acid tenderizes protein, but results seemed like magic. This patient technique separated Sunday dinner chicken from everyday meals.
Ash roasted sweet potatoes were one of the simplest yet most beloved tricks, cooked directly in the coals of an outdoor fire. Families placed whole sweet potatoes under hot ash, letting them roast slowly until their skins blackened and their insides caramelized. The result was tender, smoky, and sweet, needing no sugar or butter to taste indulgent. Children pulled them from the ashes with excitement, blowing off the dust to reveal steaming orange flesh. For many, they were both snack and supper, eaten hot in the yard after long days of work. The trick required no pots, pans, or seasoning, just fire and patience. Ash-roasted sweet potatoes symbolized how resourcefulness could turn the simplest crop into comfort. They were food of the land, as pure as it came, connecting families to earth and fire. Today, they are almost forgotten, replaced by oven-baked versions. Yet the memory of pulling sweetness from ashes lingers as a testament to survival and tradition, wrapped in smoky warmth.
Adding baking soda to beans was considered strange practice that would turn beans to mush. Yet, African American cooks knew a pinch helped tough dried beans cook faster and more evenly. Scientists now confirm that baking soda raises the pH of cooking water, which weakens pectin in bean skins and allows faster hydration without extended soaking. Research shows that alkaline environments also reduce compounds that cause digestive discomfort, making beans easier on sensitive stomachs. Grandmothers added just enough to help beans along without turning them into paste, a balance learned through generations. The technique was especially valuable when time was short or beans were old and stubborn. What seemed like unnecessary kitchen chemistry was practical solution to common problems that science now validates. Temperature testing with bread was a practical technique that guaranteed properly heated frying oil without thermometers. African American cooks dropped small cubes of stale bread into fat, watching how quickly they sizzled to determine correct temperatures. Bread that sank limply indicated oil too cool for proper frying, while cubes that blackened immediately signaled dangerous overheating. The perfect temperature produced bread that bubbled actively and turned golden within 60 seconds, creating ideal conditions for frying. This method worked because bread and batter responded similarly to heat, making it an accurate predictor of coating behavior. Families passed down timing guidelines, with some counting seconds allowed, while others relied on visual color changes. The bread test offered immediate feedback, no thermometer matched. Preheating low and slow was essential wisdom that separated experienced cooks from beginners in Black kitchens of the 1950s. Grandmothers never rushed their cast iron, understanding that heavy pans needed time to heat evenly across their entire surface. A skillet placed over high flame developed hot spots that burned food in patches. Instead, the pan went over low heat for 15 minutes, the iron gradually absorbing warmth until every inch reached the same temperature. Only then would the flame increase. Children learned patience watching this process. The evenly heated surface meant chicken browned uniformly, cornbread developed consistent crust, and nothing stuck. This technique protected the seasoning too, preventing thermal shock that could damage the finish. The slow approach extended the pan's life across generations.
Chitterling fritters were another way African American kitchens stretched every part of the hog, ensuring nothing went to waste. Chitlins, or pig intestines, were cleaned, boiled, and then chopped finely before being mixed with flour, eggs, and seasonings. The mixture was formed into patties and fried in hot fat until golden. The result was crispy on the outside, tender inside, and packed with flavor. Families prized fritters because they could feed many mouths with very little meat, transforming scraps into something satisfying. For children, the fritters felt like a snack, even if they came from humble origins. The smell of frying chitlins was strong, but the taste was treasured by those who grew up with it. Chitterling fritters were not just food, but part of a tradition that honored the skill of turning the least into the most. Today, they are rarely made, their labor-intensive preparation out of step with fast meals. Yet they remain a reminder of resilience and ingenuity, showing how survival could be fried into something unforgettable.
Adding vinegar to cooking greens was dismissed as peculiar taste preference, yet African American cooks insisted the splash of acid made vegetables more nutritious. Scientists now confirm that vinegar helps preserve vitamins during cooking, prevents color loss, and increases absorption of minerals like iron and calcium from leafy vegetables. Research shows that acidic environments protect certain nutrients from heat degradation while breaking down plant cell walls to release others. Grandmothers added their splash of apple cider or white vinegar toward the end of cooking, timing perfected through generations. The tang balanced the richness of smoked meat and cut through natural bitterness. What seemed like arbitrary seasoning was actually nutritional optimization that maximized what bodies could extract from every pot. Buttermilk soaking was a transformative technique that tenderized tough proteins while creating superior coating adhesion. African American cooks discovered that acid in buttermilk broke down muscle fibers in chicken and pork, producing remarkably tender results after frying. Soaking time varied by protein, with chicken often submerged overnight while smaller pieces required only a few hours. Beyond tenderizing, buttermilk created a tacky surface that grabbed flour and held it firmly throughout frying. Some families added hot sauce directly to the buttermilk bath, allowing flavors to penetrate deep into meat before cooking. The technique was especially valued for older chickens or tougher cuts needing help becoming tender. Buttermilk soaking became so essential that many cooks considered this step non-negotiable for proper soul food. The cold pan stock for chicken defied conventional wisdom but delivered perfect results every time. Black grandmothers placed seasoned chicken pieces into a cold cast iron skillet with solid shortening, then turned on the heat. As the pan warmed slowly, the fat rendered gradually, allowing the coating to set before the fierce sizzle began. This prevented flour from falling off and ensured the crust adhered perfectly. The chicken fried itself as temperature climbed, developing deep golden color without burning. Kitchens filled with gentle popping that grew louder as heat intensified. Children learned to judge doneness by ear as much as sight. This method required trust and patience with the slow build, but it produced crispier, more evenly cooked chicken than any hot-start method could achieve.
Boiled peanut soup was a clever way to turn a cheap, plentiful snack into a rich and sustaining meal. Families started with boiled peanuts, soft and savory, then blended them with broth, onions, and sometimes milk to create a creamy soup. It was high in protein and carried a nutty depth that filled bellies when meat was scarce. African American kitchens especially valued peanuts, which had been part of food traditions since arriving from Africa. Children who were used to eating boiled peanuts from paper bags found it surprising to see them turned into soup, but the taste was comforting. For many, it was a dish of invention, born of necessity yet delicious enough to be remembered fondly. Peanut soup showed the creativity of cooks who could stretch a handful of legumes into a meal for an entire family. Though rarely seen today, it reflects the ingenuity of those who could not afford to waste anything. Boiled peanut soup was both survival and celebration, served warm with pride.
Drinking pot liquor from greens was a practice that made outsiders cringe, yet African American families treasured every drop of that dark, rich cooking liquid. Modern nutrition research confirms what grandmothers always knew, that broth contains concentrated vitamins and minerals that leach from the greens during cooking. Scientists discovered pot liquor holds more nutritional value than the vegetables themselves, packed with water-soluble vitamins B and C. Families would sip it warm from cups or soak cornbread until it softened into a nourishing meal. During lean times, this liquid gold stretched resources while delivering essential nutrition. What doctors now call nutrient-dense broth, Black families simply called pot liquor, and they never wasted a single precious drop. Cast iron pre-seasoning rituals were sacred practices that transformed ordinary pots into legendary frying vessels. Before any oil touched the skillet, grandmothers would heat the empty pan slowly over low flames, allowing iron to warm evenly and release moisture from its pores. This process took 20 minutes of gradual heating before fat was added. The preheated iron created a frying surface that sealed batters instantly rather than allowing them to absorb excess grease. Families passed down specific instructions about when the pan was ready, often describing the moment when a water drop danced and evaporated within seconds. Many cooks wiped the heated surface with cloth dipped in lard to reinforce seasoning before each use. These rituals created non-stick surfaces that no modern coating could ever match. The grease-saving ritual was sacred practice in Black kitchens where nothing went to waste. After frying, grandmothers let grease cool slightly, then strained it through cheesecloth into ceramic crocks kept beside the stove. This collected grease contained concentrated flavor from countless meals: bacon, chicken, fish, all mingling into liquid gold. The containers were never washed, only replenished, creating layers of seasoning that deepened over months. When cooking began, a spoonful of saved grease went into the skillet first, adding depth that fresh oil could never provide. Children understood this murky fat represented economy and flavor combined. The ritual continued daily without fanfare, simply part of kitchen rhythm. Modern cooks might cringe, but this technique delivered taste that made even simple vegetables memorable.
Grape hull pie was an ingenious way to waste nothing, even after grapes had been pressed for juice or wine. The thick, chewy skins were simmered with sugar and spices, then baked into a pie with a flaky crust. The result was a dessert that was both tart and sweet, carrying the full essence of the grape. For many households, it meant stretching a harvest further, ensuring no part of the fruit was discarded. Children who expected jelly were surprised to find grape skins tucked into pies, yet grew to love their unique flavor. Grape hull pie was common in homesteads where every scrap counted, reflecting a deep respect for the land's bounty. It represented a kind of cooking where thrift and creativity merged, transforming leftovers into tradition. Today, it is rarely seen outside of heritage cookbooks, nearly erased by modern preferences. Yet grape hull pie reminds us of the cleverness of past kitchens where nothing was wasted and every bite carried the flavor of ingenuity.
Using every part of vegetables was seen as desperate poverty, cooking by those who discarded carrot tops, beet greens, and turnip leaves without a second thought. African American cooks knew those parts contained nutrition that grocery stores trained people to throw away. Scientists now confirm that vegetable tops often contain higher concentrations of vitamins and minerals than the roots they grow from. Beet greens provide more iron than the beets themselves. Carrot tops offer compounds that support liver function. Turnip greens deliver calcium, rivaling dairy products. Grandmothers washed and cooked these tops alongside their vegetables, stretching resources while maximizing nutrition. What seemed like making do with scraps was actually whole food eating that modern nutritionists now champion as optimal. Draining on brown paper bags was a practical technique that removed excess grease while keeping crusts crispy. African American families saved grocery bags for this purpose, spreading them flat beside the stove to receive freshly fried foods. The uncoated paper absorbed oil more effectively than cloth towels while allowing steam to escape rather than trapping it against food. Wire racks were rare in modest kitchens, but paper bags were free and plentiful. The bags also kept fried foods warm as batches accumulated, building piles of golden chicken while the cook continued working. Children often competed for pieces closest to the bag's edge, believing those had drained longest and were crispiest. This technique represented the resourcefulness of turning ordinary items into essential cooking tools. Crowding prevention in the skillet was fundamental wisdom that Black grandmothers enforced strictly. Putting too many pieces into hot grease at once dropped the oil temperature dramatically, resulting in soggy food that absorbed the fat instead of crisping properly. Each piece needed space around it for heat to circulate and steam to escape. Grandmothers typically fried in batches, sometimes taking over an hour to complete enough chicken for a large family. The temptation to rush was strong, especially with hungry children waiting, but experienced cooks knew shortcuts produce inferior results. They'd rather work longer and serve perfect food than hurry and disappoint. The spacing allowed each piece to develop its own beautiful crust. This patience over speed approach defined careful cooking.
Cornmeal. Fried apple rings were a treat that turned ordinary fruit into something special. Slices of apples were dipped in a batter of cornmeal and flour, then fried until crisp and golden. The result was sweet, tangy, and crunchy, often sprinkled with a touch of sugar if available. Families made them as a way to stretch apples, transforming a few into enough for everyone to enjoy. Children adored the playful ring shapes and the satisfying crunch, while adults valued the thrift and simplicity. They were often served as a dessert or afternoon snack, offering comfort without extravagance. The use of cornmeal highlighted Southern resourcefulness, combining staples into something delightful. Today, fried apple rings are rarely seen, lost to quicker packaged treats and modern snacks. Yet they remain a testament to creativity, turning a single apple into a feast of flavor and fun. Cornmeal fried apple rings proved that even the simplest ingredients could carry joy.
Salting meat well in advance was dismissed as practice that would dry out proteins. Yet African American cooks knew their roasts turned out juicier when salted the night before. Food scientists now call this dry brining and recommend it enthusiastically. Research confirms that salt initially draws moisture to the surface, but given time, that brine reabsorbs deep into the meat, carrying flavor and breaking down tough proteins. The result is meat that stays moist during cooking while developing better browning throughout. Grandmothers would rub their Sunday roasts with salt and spices, letting them rest overnight. What modern chefs present as revolutionary technique, Black cooks practiced for generations without fancy terminology. They trusted their results over expert opinions that turned out to be wrong. Seasoned salt blending was a personalized art that gave each family's fried foods their distinctive taste. African American cooks created custom spice mixtures combining salt with paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, black pepper, and sometimes cayenne. These blends were mixed in large batches and stored in repurposed jars, always within arm's reach during cooking. The proportions varied by family, with some preferring heavier garlic notes while others emphasized heat. Children grew up recognizing their grandmother's specific seasoned salt as the taste of home, a flavor impossible to replicate with store-bought alternatives. Some cooks guarded exact ratios as closely held secrets, revealing them only to trusted family members. These personalized blends transformed identical ingredients into dishes that tasted uniquely like one kitchen. The flip once rule governed fried chicken in Black kitchens, where grandmothers understood that constant turning ruined the crust. Each piece went into hot grease and stayed put until the bottom side turned deep golden brown, usually 8 to 10 minutes depending on thickness. Only then did the chicken get flipped, cooking another 8 minutes on the second side. Lifting and checking released heat, extended cooking time, and risked the coating separating from the meat. The patience required was considerable, but the reward was chicken with an unbroken crust on both sides. Children watching at the stove learned to trust the process rather than fidgeting with food. Grandmothers could tell doneness by sound alone, the sizzle changing pitch as moisture cooked away. This single flip discipline separated masters from amateurs.
Peanut shell tea was one of those humble tricks that proved nothing ever went to waste. When peanuts were boiled for snacks, families would save the discarded shells, boil them in water, and strain the liquid to make a faintly nutty tea. It had a thin, earthy flavor, more comforting than bold, but it filled mugs and warmed bellies when nothing else was available. For households short on coffee or other luxuries, peanut shell tea was a way to make do, a reminder that every scrap could serve a purpose. Children sometimes wrinkled their noses at its taste, but adults appreciated its warmth and thrift. It was more than just a drink. It was survival steeped in resourcefulness. Today, it has been nearly forgotten, remembered only in stories of lean times and hard winters. Peanut shell tea reflected a mindset where creativity was as important as ingredients. It is a reminder that sometimes even the husk of something familiar could be transformed into a simple comfort.
Letting batter rest before frying was a step many modern cooks skip. Yet, African American grandmothers insisted The weight made all the difference in crunch and texture. Food scientists now confirm that resting allows gluten strands to relax, starches to hydrate fully, and air bubbles to stabilize, creating lighter, crispier coatings. Research shows rested batters absorb less oil during frying because their structure is more cohesive. Grandmothers would mix their cornmeal coating, then attend to other kitchen tasks while the mixture transformed. The resulting fried chicken and catfish emerged with crust that shattered between teeth rather than turning soggy. What seemed like patience forced by busy kitchens was deliberate technique that improved texture and reduced oil absorption. Self-rising flour secrets produced lighter, more tender coatings than plain flour could achieve. African American cooks discovered that the leavening agents in self-rising flour created tiny air pockets within batters as they hit hot oil. These pockets made crusts crispier and less dense, while helping coatings adhere better to proteins. The technique was especially valued for fried fish, where heavy coatings could overwhelm delicate flesh. Some cooks mixed self-rising flour with regular flour to control the amount of lift, adjusting ratios based on what they were frying. Others added small amounts of baking powder to plain flour to achieve similar effects. The approach showed how understanding ingredient chemistry could transform simple frying into something approaching artistry. The morning after reheat was how Black grandmothers restored leftover fried chicken to near original glory. Cold chicken went into a cast iron skillet over a medium-low heat with no added oil, the residual fat in the coating providing enough lubrication. The pan was covered loosely, allowing gentle heat to warm meat through while the bottom crisped against iron. After several minutes, pieces were flipped to crisp the other side. This method avoided microwave sogginess and conventional oven drying. Children would wake to chicken sizzling again, knowing breakfast would be special. The technique worked because cast iron's even heat distribution prevented scorching while restoring crunch. This second-day preparation sometimes rivaled the original, proving good technique extended beyond initial cooking.
Dandelion coffee was a creative substitute during lean years, when real coffee was too expensive or unavailable. Families dug up dandelion roots, roasted them until dark, and ground them into a coarse powder brewed like coffee. The drink was bitter, earthy, and warming, offering a small comfort in times of scarcity. It lacked caffeine, but it filled the ritual of morning mugs and shared breaks. Children sometimes joined adults in sipping it, finding the flavor strange but familiar. For many, dandelion coffee symbolized thrift and resilience, proof that even weeds could be transformed into something useful. It carried cultural weight as a practice of ingenuity, showing that nothing in nature was overlooked. Today, it is nearly forgotten outside of foraging enthusiasts or health circles. Once a poor man's drink, it now reflects a lost chapter of survival cooking. Dandelion coffee remains a story of adaptation, born of necessity but remembered with pride for its creativity.
Cooking dried corn instead of fresh was seen as settling for inferior ingredients when frozen options filled grocery stores. African American cooks knew that drying concentrated flavors and nutrients that fresh corn lost within hours of picking. Scientists now confirm that dried corn contains higher levels of resistant starch that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. Research shows that the drying process also makes certain antioxidants more bioavailable than the fresh kernels provide. Grandmothers kept jars of dried corn in pantries, rehydrating it for stews and succotash that tasted richer than any fresh version. The technique preserved summer harvests through winter, months when nutrition was hardest to find. What seemed like making do without modern convenience was actually superior preservation. Draining on brown paper bags was a practical technique that removed excess grease while keeping crusts crispy. African American families saved grocery bags for this purpose, spreading them flat beside the stove to receive freshly fried foods. The uncoated paper absorbed oil more effectively than cloth towels while allowing steam to escape rather than trapping it against food. Wire racks were rare in modest kitchens, but paper bags were free and plentiful. The bags also kept fried foods warm as batches accumulated, building piles of golden chicken while the cook continued working. Children often competed for pieces closest to the bag's edge, believing those had drained longest and were crispiest. This technique represented the resourcefulness of turning ordinary items into essential cooking tools. The lid-on steam finish was a technique Black grandmothers used to ensure thick chicken pieces cooked through without burning the exterior. After achieving beautiful golden crust on both sides, the skillet got partially covered, trapping steam that gently finished cooking the interior. The lid stayed slightly ajar to let some steam escape, preventing the crust from turning soggy. This method worked especially well for bone-in thighs and drumsticks that needed extra time to reach safe temperature. Without the lid, the outside would blacken before the inside. Finished. Grandmothers monitored carefully, removing the cover during final minutes to re-crisp any softened coating. The technique showed sophisticated understanding of heat and moisture management. Children learned that cooking required constant attention.
Wild blackberry syrup was a way to capture the taste of summer, made from berries picked along fence rows and country paths. Families gathered buckets of ripe blackberries, boiled them with sugar, and reduced the juice into a thick, tangy syrup. It was poured over flapjacks, biscuits, or even cornbread, making simple meals feel luxurious. Children enjoyed the berry picking as much as the syrup, coming home with stained hands and lips. Adults treasured the syrup for its ability to preserve summer sweetness through the cold months. For many households, it represented both resourcefulness and abundance, turning wild fruit into lasting comfort. Sharing jars with neighbors reinforced community bonds, making it more than just food. Today, blackberry syrup has almost vanished from kitchens, replaced by mass-produced bottles. Its loss reflects a decline in foraging traditions and seasonal cooking. Yet wild blackberry syrup was more than a condiment. It was a piece of summer captured in a jar. Forgotten now, it once brightened even the humblest of meals.
Fried fatback was the foundation of flavor in African American kitchens, rendering golden lard while creating crispy slices that seasoned greens, beans, and everything in between. Grandmothers sliced thick pieces from salted pork back and fried them slowly in cast iron until the fat melted and edges turned golden brown. The rendered fat was saved in coffee cans, becoming the essential cooking medium for countless dishes. The crispy pieces were eaten as a side, crumbled over vegetables, or enjoyed with cornbread between meals. For families with limited money, fatback provided both seasoning and substance from one affordable cut. Children grew up with the sound of sizzling pork-filling morning kitchens. This technique represented resourcefulness, turning one ingredient into both flavor and fuel. Onion powder dusting was a finishing technique that added aromatic depth to freshly fried foods. African American cooks kept shakers of onion powder beside their frying stations, sprinkling it over hot pieces immediately after they emerged from oil. The residual heat activated the powder's volatile compounds, releasing savory aromas that made mouths water before the first bite. This final seasoning layer adhered to the slightly oily surface, creating flavor that flour dredges alone could not achieve. The technique worked especially well on fried okra, where onion powder complemented natural earthiness. Some cooks combined onion powder with garlic powder and paprika for more complex finishing blends. The practice showed that seasoning continued after cooking ended, with each step building layers of flavor. The two-skillet system was how Black grandmothers managed large batch frying without sacrificing quality. One skillet held actively frying food, while the second preheated to receive the next batch. When the first pan needed temperature recovery, the second was already at perfect heat. This rotation kept production continuous and consistent, cutting total cooking time significantly. Both skillets required attention, monitoring temperature, adjusting flame, timing flips, but experienced cooks developed rhythm that made it look effortless. The system worked especially well during family gatherings when 20 or 30 pieces needed frying. Children watched the choreography of grandmothers moving between pans, understanding that efficiency came from preparation. This method showed sophisticated kitchen management.
Boiled sorghum dumplings were a poor man's dessert that brought sweetness into homes where luxuries were rare. Simple balls of dough were simmered in sorghum syrup until tender, soaking up the rich, earthy sweetness. They were sticky, soft, and filling, offering families a treat that cost next to nothing. Children loved them for their candy-like texture, while adults valued them as a way to make sorghum syrup stretch further. The dumplings were sometimes served warm as dessert, or even eaten cold the next day as breakfast. They reflected the creativity of households that knew how to make a feast out of scraps and staples. Sorghum was an essential crop in the South, and its syrup became the backbone of many frugal recipes, but dumplings gave it a starring role. Today, this dish is nearly forgotten, replaced by more polished sweets, but in its time, it was cherished. Boiled sorghum dumplings were proof that sweetness did not require extravagance, only ingenuity and the will to make something from almost nothing.
Cooking beans with aromatics from the start was questioned by purists who insisted seasonings should only be added after beans softened. African American cooks knew that onions, garlic, and herbs needed hours to infuse their flavors deep into every bean. Scientists now confirm that aromatic compounds penetrate more effectively when added to cold water and heated gradually with the beans. Research shows that certain seasonings actually help beans cook more evenly by affecting how water interacts with bean starches. Grandmothers built their pots with onion, garlic, bay leaves, and smoked meat from the beginning, creating beans seasoned through to their centers. What seemed like impatience was superior method that produced more flavorful results than last-minute seasoning ever could.
Fried mullet with hush puppies brought the flavor of coastal mornings to inland tables, celebrating the bounty of southern waters. Fresh mullet fillets were seasoned and lightly dredged in cornmeal before being fried to a crisp golden finish, their mild flesh staying tender and flaky. Alongside the fish, cornmeal hush puppies sizzled in the same hot oil, forming round fritters with a crunchy crust and soft, savory interior. The combination delivered a contrast of textures and tastes that spoke of seaside breakfasts and family gatherings. Some cooks added chopped onions or jalapenos to the hush puppies for an extra kick, while others served lemon wedges to brighten the fish. This meal reminded families of fishing trips, coastal traditions, and the joy of bringing fresh catch straight from net to skillet. Fried mullet with hush puppies honored African American ties to coastal communities and the creative spirit of cooks who turned fresh seafood and simple cornmeal into a feast worth waking up early for.
Hot sauce integration techniques varied among Black grandmothers, each having preferred methods for adding heat without overwhelming other flavors. Some added Louisiana-style hot sauce directly to the buttermilk soak, letting vinegar and pepper infuse the meat over hours. Others mixed cayenne into seasoned flour, distributing heat evenly across the crust. A few brushed hot sauce onto finished pieces while still glistening from the fryer. The goal was layered heat that built gradually rather than assaulting the tongue. Children with sensitive palates got milder pieces, while adults enjoyed versions that made foreheads sweat. Regional preferences influenced choices. Some families favored vinegar-based sauces, while others preferred thicker pepper blends. This customization showed how basic technique adapted to different tastes.
Scuppernong wine. Syrup was a sweet trick pulled from the wild grapes of the South, boiled down into a thick syrup. Families harvested scuppernongs in late summer, pressing them for juice and reducing the liquid into a golden syrup poured over biscuits or pancakes. The syrup captured the musky sweetness of the grapes, offering a taste of abundance even in lean times. Children loved it as a rare treat, licking it from spoons when mothers turned their backs. For adults, it was a way to preserve the harvest and add luxury to otherwise plain meals. This syrup reflected the creativity of households that refused to waste even the smallest fruit. Though it required time and patience, the payoff was a jar of sunshine to last through winter. Today, Scuppernong wine syrup is nearly unknown, its memory tied to homesteads and family gatherings. Forgotten now, it remains a symbol of thrift and sweetness pulled straight from the land. It was heritage in a jar, poured with love.
Fermenting vegetables at home was viewed as risky preservation that could cause illness, yet African American cooks kept crocks of fermenting produce that provided nutrition through winter months. Scientists now champion fermentation as one of the most health-promoting traditions, producing probiotics that support gut health and immune function. Research confirms that fermented vegetables contain higher vitamin levels than fresh counterparts while being easier to digest. Grandmothers made chow chow, pickled peppers, and sauerkraut using techniques passed down through generations. The process required no special equipment, just salt, time, and knowledge families preserved through practice. What modern food safety tried to discourage, health science now celebrates as traditional wisdom worth reviving. Cast iron depth control determined whether fried foods emerged evenly, golden, or spotty and burnt. African American cooks understood that oil depth affected cooking dramatically, with shallow oil producing different results than deep submersion. For pan frying, oil reached halfway up the food, requiring flipping to cook both sides. For deep frying, pieces floated freely, cooking evenly without turning. Experienced cooks matched the oil depth to what they were preparing, using shallow oil for delicate fish fillets and deeper oil for thick chicken pieces. The heavy cast iron maintained consistent temperatures better than thin pans, preventing the temperature drops that caused greasy results. Controlling oil depth represented advanced frying knowledge passed down through generations of skilled cooks. The resting period after frying was crucial knowledge Black grandmothers understood instinctively. Fried foods pulled straight from hot grease were good, but those allowed to rest on wire racks for several minutes reached another level. During this pause, the crust continued to crisp as residual heat escaped while juices redistributed evenly through the meat. Cutting into chicken too soon released precious moisture that should have stayed locked within. The resting period also allowed excess grease to drip away, making each bite cleaner and crunchier. Children learned patience watching their grandmothers hold back the family from grabbing pieces too quickly. That waiting time transformed good fried food into perfect fried food. The technique required self-control, but rewarded patience handsomely.
Cowtail stew was a hearty dish made not just from prized oxtails, but from the actual tails of cows, stewed until tender. The tails were simmered slowly with onions, carrots, and root vegetables until the broth turned rich and gelatinous. It was a dish that wasted nothing, proving every part of the animal could serve as food. Families loved it for its deep flavor and comforting warmth, especially during colder months. Children enjoyed gnawing on the tender meat, while adults valued its ability to stretch scraps into full meals. cowtail stew reflected a mindset of frugality and respect for the animal, making sure no part went unused. It was a communal dish, often cooked in large pots and shared at gatherings. Today, it has largely been forgotten, replaced by more refined cuts of meat. But in its time, it was beloved.
Ham hock and turnip greens carried tradition in every slow-simmered pot, filling homes with smoky aroma that signaled Sunday dinner was near. Grandmothers washed turnip greens several times to remove grit, then added them to pots with smoked ham hocks, onions, and a splash of vinegar. The greens simmered for hours until silky and tender, absorbing the rich, salty essence of the pork. The potlikker left behind was liquid gold, sipped from cups or sopped with cornbread to capture every drop. Ham hocks were affordable cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for stretching meals across large families. The meat fell off the bone by cooking's end, offering protein alongside vegetables in one nourishing pot. This dish taught children that patience and humble ingredients created meals worth waiting for.
Fried fatback with biscuits was the kind of breakfast that came from deep tradition, from years when every part of the animal was used and nothing was taken for granted. Before bacon became the breakfast standard, fatback was the salty, sizzling star of the morning. Grandparents sliced it thick and fried it until the edges crisped and curled, releasing a savory aroma that filled the whole house. The drippings soaked into fresh biscuits, turning them into something rich and flavorful without needing butter or gravy. The combination was simple but powerful. A pairing that carried families through long days of labor, and school fatback was inexpensive, accessible, and packed with flavor, which made it a natural choice for rural homes and city kitchens alike. Children grew up associating that salty crunch with mornings spent around crowded tables, hands reaching for biscuits still warm from the oven. Even though fatback is rarely seen in modern breakfast routines, the memory of it remains strong for those who grew up with its bold taste. It represents a time when meals came from resourcefulness, from tradition, and from knowing how to make the most of what you had.
Skillet gravy from pan drippings was the reward for all that careful frying, and Black grandmothers never let those precious brown bits go to waste. After the last piece of chicken came out, most grease was poured off, leaving a tablespoon or two plus all the flavorful fond stuck to the bottom. Flour went in next, stirred constantly until golden and fragrant. Then came milk or broth, added slowly while scraping up every speck of caramelized goodness. The gravy thickened into something velvety and rich, tasting of everything fried before. Grandmothers adjusted seasoning by taste, adding pepper and sometimes hot sauce. This gravy transformed simple biscuits or rice into complete meals. Children learned the stirring rhythm that prevented lumps. Nothing from that skillet went unused.
Potato peel pie was the epitome of wasting nothing, transforming the discarded skins of potatoes into a hearty filling. The peels were boiled, mashed, and combined with onions, seasonings, or bits of fat to create a savory mixture. Baked into a crust, it resembled a proper pie, stretching scraps into a full meal. Families loved it because it turned what others might consider garbage into something nourishing. Children often ate it without even realizing it was made from peels, while adults appreciated the frugality. During times when potatoes themselves were too precious to waste, even the skins held value. The pie embodied the creativity of households that refused to throw away a single bite. Today, potato peel pie has almost vanished, remembered only as a relic of survival cooking. Yet it remains a testament to the spirit of making do, finding dignity and comfort in the humblest of scraps. Potato peel pie shows how resilience and imagination could turn waste into a family supper. Hog cracklin gravy was a trick to bring bold flavor to otherwise plain meals of rice, potatoes, or cornbread. Cracklings, the crispy bits left from rendering pork fat, were stirred into pan drippings and flour to make a rich, textured gravy. The salty crunch of the cracklings turned a simple starch into something hearty and satisfying. Families loved it because it stretched scraps into abundance, proving that nothing from the hog was wasted. It was often poured over large bowls of rice, transforming the cheapest ingredient into a meal fit for a feast. Children scooped it eagerly, not realizing they were eating thrift disguised as indulgence. The gravy carried the smoky, savory essence of pork, a taste that defined many kitchens of the South. Today, hog cracklin gravy is nearly forgotten, replaced by smoother gravies with no trace of grit. Yet in its time, it embodied the art of survival cooking, where resourcefulness brought joy to the table. Hog cracklin gravy was poverty made flavorful.
The honey drizzle finish added sweetness that transformed fried chicken into something approaching dessert. African American cooks discovered that drizzling warm honey over freshly fried pieces created a glaze that balanced salty, savory flavors with natural sweetness. The honey was applied immediately after frying, while pieces were still hot enough to thin the viscous liquid into a light coating. Some cooks added hot sauce to their honey, creating a sweet-heat combination that became signature flavors in certain households. The technique worked particularly well with fried biscuits and cornbread, where honey soaked into warm bread, creating decadent breakfast treats. This finishing method showed how soul food cooks thought beyond basic preparation to create complete flavor experiences. Cast iron fish frying mastery required different techniques than chicken, and Black grandmothers adjusted their methods accordingly. Fish cooked faster, needed hotter oil, and demanded gentler handling to prevent delicate flesh from breaking. Catfish fillets got dredged in cornmeal rather than flour, the coarser coating creating distinctive crunch. The oil had to be properly hot. Too cool and coating absorbed the grease. Too hot and it burned before fish cooked through. Grandmothers flipped fish only once using thin spatulas that slid beneath without tearing. Pieces came out when they floated and turned deep golden, usually just 4 or 5 minutes per side. Friday fish fries brought families together, the smell of cornmeal-crusted catfish announcing the weekend had arrived. This mastery showed how the same skillet served different purposes.
Pickled pig ears were a Southern delicacy born from the nose-to-tail tradition of wasting nothing. Pig ears, often overlooked cuts, were simmered until tender, then packed in jars with vinegar, salt, and spices to pickle. The result was chewy, tangy, and surprisingly flavorful, enjoyed as a snack on crackers or straight from the jar. Some added chili peppers for a kick, while others kept it simple, letting the vinegar shine. Families loved them because they preserved well without refrigeration, making them valuable in times when resources were scarce. Children were sometimes hesitant to try them, but adults knew they packed both flavor and nutrition. For communities determined to honor every part of the hog, pig ears were no different than hams or chops in value. Today, they are mostly forgotten outside of specialty shops or older cooks who still remember their place on the table. Pickled pig ears represent resilience and resourcefulness, a reminder of how people turned humble cuts into beloved bites that carried stories as well as sustenance.
Cooking greens in fat was condemned as adding unnecessary calories to healthy vegetables, yet African American cooks insisted their method made greens work harder. Scientists confirmed that fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K cannot be absorbed without dietary fat, meaning raw or fat-free greens deliver far less nutrition than they promise. Research shows that cooking leafy vegetables in bacon drippings dramatically increases bioavailability of these essential vitamins. Grandmothers sautéed their greens in rendered fat or added them to pots already seasoned with pork. The practice also made vegetables more palatable, encouraging greater consumption. What dietitians dismissed as unhealthy indulgence was nutritional optimization, ensuring bodies extracted maximum benefit. Fat was never the enemy of greens, but their essential partner. The crowding prevention method was fundamental knowledge that determined whether fried foods emerged crispy or soggy. African American cooks understood that adding too many pieces to hot oil dropped the temperature dramatically, causing food to steam rather than fry. They worked in small batches, often 3 or 4 pieces at a time, maintaining high heat necessary for proper crust formation. This patience contradicted the desire to finish quickly, but results justified the extra time. Between batches, cooks allowed oil to return to proper temperature before adding more food. Some used the bread test repeatedly throughout cooking to monitor heat. The method required standing at the stove longer, but families who rushed learned quickly that crowded pans produced limp, greasy food. The splatter shield with pot lids was practical protection Black grandmothers used against hot grease burns while monitoring their frying food. A lid held at an angle over the skillet deflected spitting oil away from hands and arms while allowing steam to escape and letting cooks watch browning progress. This technique required skill. Holding the lid too close trapped steam and made food soggy, while holding it too far offered little protection. Grandmothers developed steady hands from years of practice, able to flip chicken one-handed while the other held the shield. Children were warned repeatedly about grease burns and taught this defensive technique before being allowed near the stove. The pot lid method also caught grease vapor, keeping kitchen walls cleaner. Every kitchen already had one.
Field pea fritters turned a humble southern crop into crispy cakes that stretched to feed a family. Cowpeas, often grown in backyard gardens, were soaked, ground, and mixed with onions or spices before being shaped into patties and fried golden. The result was hearty and filling, with a nutty flavor that paired beautifully with cornbread or greens. Families loved them because they made use of cheap, plentiful legumes while providing protein in diets where meat was scarce. Children enjoyed them as finger food, dipping fritters in sauces or gravies, while adults appreciated their thrift and versatility. Leftover peas from one night could easily become fritters the next day, ensuring nothing went to waste. Fritters could also be packed in lunches or eaten cold, making them useful for workers in the fields. Today, you rarely see field pea fritters outside of older cookbooks or community gatherings. They were a reminder of how resourcefulness turned simple crops into meals worth remembering. Field pea fritters may be forgotten now, but they once carried whole families through hard times.
Slow cooking over low heat was dismissed as inefficient waste of time by those who valued speed over quality, yet African American cooks knew patience transformed tough cuts into tender luxury. Scientists now confirm that collagen in connective tissue requires extended exposure to low temperatures to convert into gelatin, creating silky texture that quick cooking cannot produce. Research shows that slow braising breaks down muscle fibers gently while retaining moisture that high heat would drive out. Grandmothers set their pots on wood stoves and let oxtails and neck bones simmer for hours until meat fell from bones into rich gravy. What seemed like old-fashioned cooking was precise technique that expensive restaurants now charge premium prices to replicate. Low and slow was about knowing what good food requires. Hot sauce, brine, marinating infused proteins with spicy, tangy flavor that penetrated deep beneath the surface. African American cooks combined favorite hot sauces with salt, creating liquid marinades that transformed bland chicken into something remarkable before it touched the fryer. The vinegar in most hot sauces tenderized meat while peppers deposited heat that survived frying. Marinating times ranged from a few hours to overnight, with longer soaks producing more intense flavors. Some families developed signature marinades using specific hot sauce brands, creating taste profiles children associated with home. The technique worked well with tougher cuts benefiting from acid-based tenderizing. After marinating, pieces were patted dry before dredging, but flavor remained embedded in the meat beneath every crispy bite. Egg wash for extra crunch was the technique Black grandmothers used when regular dredging wasn't enough. Between the buttermilk soak and the flour coating, pieces got dipped in beaten egg that created an additional binding layer. This extra step meant the flour adhered more completely and built up thicker, creating crunchier crust that stayed intact longer. Some grandmothers did double dips, flour, then egg, then flour again, building armor-like coating. The egg also contributed to deeper golden color during frying, making the finished pieces look as good as they tasted. This technique took extra time and dirtied more dishes, so it was reserved for special occasions when appearance and texture mattered most. Children noticed the difference immediately, the extra crunch announcing something special had been made.
Turnip top kraut was a sharper cousin to sauerkraut, made from the leafy tops of turnips that others might discard. Farmers and home cooks salted the greens, packed them tightly, and left them to ferment until tangy and sour. The result was a condiment that paired well with beans, cornbread, or pork, adding brightness to otherwise heavy meals. Families valued it as a way to preserve greens long after harvest, ensuring food for the winter months. Children sometimes resisted its strong flavor, but adults prized it for its bite and health benefits. Turnip top kraut reflected a deep tradition of thrift and preservation, a practice where nothing from the garden was wasted. It carried the taste of ingenuity, transforming what looked like scraps into a household staple. Today, it has nearly disappeared, replaced by store-bought krauts and fresher produce, but its story remains. Turnip top kraut was more than food. It was proof of the care and creativity that sustained communities through lean times and hard winters.
Soaking dried beans overnight was a ritual African American cooks performed religiously, though food scientists once insisted the practice was unnecessary habit. Research now confirms that overnight soaking reduces compounds called oligosaccharides that cause digestive discomfort while decreasing cooking time and improving nutrient absorption. Scientists discovered that soaked beans retain more minerals and produce creamier textures because water penetrates tough outer skins before heat is applied. Grandmothers would set their beans to soak before bed, knowing morning would bring a pot ready for slow cooking with ham hocks. The practice also reduced phytic acid that blocks mineral absorption. What seemed like simple kitchen routine was actually sophisticated food preparation that maximized both nutrition and digestibility. The flip timing technique was a skill that separated perfectly golden fried foods from unevenly cooked disasters. African American cooks learned to read visual cues indicating when pieces were ready to turn, watching for edges that turned deep golden while centers still showed pale batter. Flipping too early disturbed crusts before they set, while waiting too long resulted in burnt bottoms and raw tops. Experienced cooks developed internal clocks calibrated to their specific stoves, knowing exactly how many minutes each side required. The flipping motion itself required confidence, using tongs to turn pieces quickly without splashing hot oil. Some cooks lifted pieces briefly to check color before committing to the flip. This attention to timing transformed frying from guesswork into precise craft. Buttermilk soaking was a transformative technique that tenderized tough proteins while creating superior coating adhesion. African American cooks discovered that acid in buttermilk broke down muscle fibers in chicken and pork, producing remarkably tender results after frying. Soaking time varied by protein, with chicken often submerged overnight while smaller pieces required only a few hours. Beyond tenderizing, buttermilk created a tacky surface that grabbed flour and held it firmly throughout frying. Some families added hot sauce directly to the buttermilk bath, allowing flavors to penetrate deep into meat before cooking. The technique was especially valued for older chickens or tougher cuts needing help becoming tender. Buttermilk soaking became so essential that many cooks considered this step non-negotiable for proper soul food. Layering seasonings throughout cooking was considered fussy by those who simply salted food at the table, yet African American cooks built flavor in stages that created depth impossible to achieve any other way. Scientists understand that adding spices at different points creates complexity because heat transforms aromatic compounds differently depending on cooking time. Research confirms that blooming spices and hot fat releases oils that carry flavor throughout, while adding fresh herbs at the end preserves bright notes. Grandmothers seasoned meats before browning, added more spices to liquids, and finished with fresh adjustments. What seemed like excessive attention to seasoning was sophisticated technique that professional kitchens now teach as foundational skill. Black cooks understood flavor happened in layers, not all at once. Egg wash layering created adhesive barriers that locked the coatings firmly to proteins throughout the frying process. African American cooks beat eggs with small amounts of water or milk, creating thin liquid mixtures that clung to surfaces and grabbed dry ingredients. The technique involved dipping floured pieces into egg wash before returning them to seasoned flour for final coating. This layered approach built thicker, more substantial crusts than single dredging achieved. Some cooks added mustard or hot sauce directly to their egg wash, introducing additional flavors beneath the outer crust. The egg wash also helped coatings brown more evenly, producing deep golden color that signaled properly fried food. Families who skipped this step noticed crust fell away during cooking, floating separately in oil. The heavy hand with salt was controversial wisdom Black grandmothers applied despite what doctors said. They understood that salt applied before cooking penetrated meat differently than salt added at the table. Generous seasoning on raw chicken hours before frying allowed salt to dissolve into the flesh, enhancing flavor from inside rather than just coating the surface. The buttermilk soak often contains salt too, doubling the penetration. Critics worried about health, but grandmothers argued that deeply seasoned food required less salt overall. The technique also drew out surface moisture, helping flour adhere better and creating crispier crusts. Children grew up eating food that tasted complete without reaching for the salt shaker. This pre-salting approach produces noticeably more flavorful results. Cooking collard greens for hours was dismissed as overcooking vegetables into mush, yet African American grandmothers knew something nutritionists took decades to confirm. The long, slow simmer breaks down tough cellulose fibers that human stomachs struggle to digest, releasing nutrients that quick-cooked greens keep locked away. Scientists now understand that extended cooking times make minerals like calcium and iron far more bioavailable. Families gathered around pots that simmered all Sunday morning, filling kitchens with that unmistakable aroma of greens seasoned with smoked meat. What seemed like patience born of tradition was actually sophisticated food science, practiced without laboratories. Those hours at the stove created meals that nourished in ways fast cooking never could. The cold water shock method prepared vegetables for frying by creating texture contrast that survived hot oil. African American cooks blanched okra, green tomatoes, and other vegetables briefly in boiling water, then plunged them immediately into ice water to halt cooking. This process firmed exteriors while keeping interiors tender, creating ideal surfaces for batter adhesion. The temperature shock also brightened colors, making fried vegetables more visually appealing on serving platters. After shocking, vegetables were dried thoroughly before coating, as remaining moisture caused dangerous oil spatters. The technique required extra steps, but produced fried vegetables with superior textures that softer versions could not match. Experienced cooks timed blanching precisely, knowing seconds too long resulted in mushy interiors. The thermometer-free kitchen was standard in Black households, where grandmothers relied entirely on senses developed over decades. Oil temperature was judged by shimmer, smoke, and the behavior of test pieces. Meat doneness came from touch, sound, and visual cues rather than internal readings. These women had fried thousands of chickens and knew exactly when pieces were done by how they felt when prodded, how the sizzle sounded, how the crust looked. This intuitive cooking seemed like magic to children, but was accumulated experience. Grandmothers could adjust for different stoves, varying pan weights, and changing humidity without conscious calculation. The knowledge lived in their hands and ears. Modern cooks rely on gadgets, but these women proved attentive practice created its own precision. Bringing meat to room temperature before cooking was dismissed as dangerous, food safety violation. Yet, African American cooks pulled their roast from ice boxes an hour before cooking and achieved results cold start methods could not match. Food scientists now confirm that tempered meat cooks more evenly, developing better crusts while staying juicy inside, because heat does not have to overcome extreme temperature differences. Research shows that properly handled meat reaches safe temperatures faster when starting closer to room temperature. Grandmothers knew their chicken fried more evenly, and their roast came out perfectly pink throughout when rested on counters before hitting hot pans. What food safety warnings tried to ban was actually technique that improved both results and safety when practiced correctly. The crackling addition enriched batters and coatings with concentrated pork flavor that elevated every fried dish. When lard was rendered, the crispy brown bits left behind were saved rather than discarded, crushed into crumbs and mixed into flour dredges or cornmeal coatings. These cracklings added bursts of salty, porky richness throughout the breading that surprised with each bite. The technique worked particularly well with fried fish and chicken, where the crackling pieces created textural contrast against tender meat. Some cooks stirred cracklings directly into cornbread batter before frying it in hot fat. Others sprinkled them atop finished dishes as a final garnish. The practice represented the soul food commitment to extracting maximum value from every ingredient. Nothing that could add flavor was ever thrown away. The wire whisk alternative was actually a fork in most Black kitchens, grandmothers preferring the simple tool over fancy equipment. Forks beat eggs for dredging, mixed batters, and stirred gravies with surprising efficiency. The tines created enough turbulence to blend ingredients without a whisk's bulk. Grandmothers could feel texture through the fork handle, knowing when batter reached proper consistency by resistance alone. The fork required no special storage and cleaned easily. Children learning to cook started with forks because they were familiar and less intimidating. This preference for simple tools reflected broader kitchen philosophy. Skilled hands mattered more than expensive equipment. The fork proved that generations of perfect fried chicken came from technique rather than tools.
Cane syrup. Candy drops were the simple sweets that brightened childhoods when store candy was out of reach. Hot cane syrup was boiled until thick, then poured onto waxed paper in little puddles to harden. Once cooled, they became chewy, sticky drops that tasted like pure southern sunshine. Children loved them, licking fingers and saving extras in pockets for later, while parents valued how cheap and quick they were to make. The candy carried the deep flavor of cane syrup, both smoky and sweet, making it memorable even without fancy additions. Families often made them in batches for holidays or special gatherings, turning simplicity into celebration. Today, candy drops are rarely seen, replaced by mass-produced treats, but their legacy lingers in old stories. They were proof that joy could be found in the most basic of ingredients. Cane syrup candy drops showed that even in times of want, there was always room for a little sweetness to bring happiness to the household.
Saving and using meat drippings was labeled as unhealthy habit that would raise cholesterol, yet African American cooks treasure every drop that rendered from their roasts and bacon. Scientists now understand that meat drippings contain fat-soluble vitamins and compounds that processed fats lack entirely. Research confirms that natural animal fats provide stable cooking mediums that do not produce harmful compounds at high temperatures like vegetable oils can. Grandmothers poured drippings into ceramic crocks, using them to season vegetables, make gravies, and add richness to cornbread. The practice stretched food budgets while adding flavor and nutrition store-bought fats could not match. What dietitians condemned for decades, nutrition science now acknowledges as traditional wisdom worth preserving. Pepper sauce finishing added vinegary heat to fried foods in the final moments before serving. African American families kept bottles of homemade pepper sauce made by steeping hot peppers in vinegar for weeks, ready beside the stove. A few shakes over freshly fried fish or chicken cut through richness while adding brightness that balanced the heavy fat. The vinegar evaporated quickly on hot surfaces, leaving behind concentrated pepper flavor without excessive moisture that could soften crusts. Some cooks drizzled pepper sauce directly into the serving platter, allowing pieces to absorb flavor as they rested. The technique was especially popular with fried greens and okra, where the acid balanced natural bitterness. Pepper sauce finishing represented the soul food philosophy of layering flavors at every stage. Cleaning cast iron properly was knowledge Black grandmothers guarded fiercely, horrified when visitors reached for dish soap. The skillet was cleaned while still warm, wiped with paper towels to remove food particles and excess grease. Stubborn bits got scraped with a flat spatula, never abrasive scrubbers that stripped seasoning. If water was needed, it was minimal and followed immediately by a thorough drying over low heat to prevent rust. While the pan was still warm, a thin layer of oil was rubbed across the surface, maintaining seasoning until next use. This routine took seconds, but preserved pans for generations. Children learned that cast iron required different care than other cookware. The cleaning ritual was as important as cooking itself. Chitlin loaf transformed polarizing intestines into something even skeptics could appreciate, baked firm and sliceable like any meatloaf. Grandmothers cleaned chitlins meticulously, boiling them first with vinegar and spices until tender enough to grind fine. The chopped meat was mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, sage, and pepper before being packed into loaf pans and baked. The result was a savory spiced loaf that could be sliced cold for sandwiches or warmed with gravy for supper. This preparation made chitlins approachable for those who struggle with traditional texture while preserving distinctive flavor. Families served chitlin loaf at holiday gatherings, where aroma announced both tradition and celebration. The dish showed creativity of cooks who found multiple ways to honor every part of the animal.
Hoppin' John Morning Bowl carried the luck and legacy of the South into every spoonful, blending black-eyed peas, fluffy rice, and smoky bacon for a meal steeped in tradition. Peas were simmered until tender with onions, garlic, and a hint of pork, then spooned over freshly cooked rice so the savory juices soaked into every grain. A sprinkle of green onions or a splash of pepper vinegar added brightness, while some cooks stirred in diced peppers for extra color and flavor. This dish had long been served on New Year's Day for prosperity, but in the 1970s, many African-American families enjoyed it year-round as a hearty breakfast. It offered protein, fiber, and deep flavor that sustained workers and school children alike. Hoppin' John Morning Bowl reminded each generation of the history carried in its ingredients, from West African roots to Southern kitchens, proving that food could nourish both body and spirit while keeping cultural memory alive with every bite of smoky, satisfying goodness.
Pork chop, frying variations showed how Black grandmothers adapted chicken techniques for different proteins. Bone-in chops got the same buttermilk soak and seasoned flour treatment, but required different timing because pork needed thorough cooking. The meat was pounded thin sometimes, ensuring even cooking and tender results. Thicker chops got the lid-on steam finish to cook through without burning. Some grandmothers dredged pork in cornmeal instead of flour, creating rustier, crunchier coating. Others smothered fried chops in onion gravy after initial crisping. The cast iron handled pork beautifully, developing fond that made exceptional gravy. Children learned that mastering one protein meant understanding principles that transferred to others. Pig's feet and rice delivered a rich, gelatinous comfort that warmed bellies and stretched budgets further than almost any dish could. Grandmothers cleaned the feet thoroughly, scrubbing between each toe before placing them in large pots with water, onions, and bay leaves. The feet simmered for hours until meat became tender and cooking liquid turned thick with natural gelatin. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and hot sauce, the feet were served over fluffy white rice that soaked up rich, porky gravy. The collagen in pig's feet was believed to strengthen joints and nourish skin, making this both food and folk medicine. Children learn to navigate small bones and appreciate the sticky, satisfying texture that defined this traditional meal. This dish proved that cheapest cuts often delivered deepest, most satisfying flavors.
Lard-fried corn pones were the kind of breakfast that stuck to your ribs and carried you through long hours of work or school. These dense corn patties were mixed from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt before being fried golden in sizzling lard. The flavor was simple but deeply satisfying, with the crisp edges giving way to a soft interior that felt hearty in every bite. For families with little to spare, corn pones were portable and cheap, making them an everyday staple as well as a meal to take out into the fields. Children often carried them wrapped in cloth, while adults relied on them with strong coffee to start their mornings. They were versatile too, eaten plain, dipped in molasses, or even crumbled into buttermilk for a different kind of breakfast. Lard-fried corn pones were never fancy, but they were dependable, and that made them unforgettable. They represented resourcefulness and strength, the kind of food that reflected both necessity and comfort in kitchens where nothing went to waste. Which technique do you remember watching your grandparents use? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can keep preserving the kitchen wisdom our elders passed down.